Hi, I'm responding to a video called Proof Evolution is an Evil Lie from Satan. First, he says, do you believe that you came from goo, then to the zoo, then to you? That's simply not true. Of course it's not true, because that's not what evolution says. Number one, goo, he's referring to abiogenesis, not evolution. Abiogenesis has nothing to do with evolution. It's a study of the origin of life, not the development of life. And then he says to the zoo. Actually, zoos weren't around when we first evolved, so we couldn't have gone to the zoo. Then he says that it's a little known fact that what you believe determines how you act. And then he says, if you believe you came from monkey, doesn't that give you permission to act like one? What he's referring to is social Darwinism, which is an idiotic belief that a scientific principle can be applied to moral values. It's as idiotic as applying gravity, social gravitationalism. Now, and the next problem comes with, we didn't come from monkeys. We have a common ancestor with the great apes. Different things, very different things. Then he says that it wasn't very many years ago that the 10 Commandments could be found in almost every school, but now you can't find them anywhere. Why is that? He gives you a poor answer by saying that people don't want to be held accountable to their creator. Actually, it's because people have become more aware of the Constitution in recent times, and the Constitution says freedom of religion. So you don't have religion in something we're paying taxes for, and we're paying taxes for public schools. Then he says, evolution didn't start with Charles Darwin. It started with Satan in the Garden of Eden, because Satan said, if you eat the forbidden fruit, you'll be like a god. Wait a second. Didn't he just say evolution said we'd be a monkey? Now he's saying we'd be like gods? I'm not sure what he says. This is exactly the same flip-flop Kent Hovind uses constantly. Now, evolution started with it started before Darwin, yeah. But Darwin proposed a workable mechanism, which is natural selection. But it didn't start with Adam and Eve because it would have gotten written down somewhere if it was passed down from generation to generation. In fact, there's no biblical support for this claim that evolution started in the Garden of Eden. Then he says, evolutionists have the severe misfortune of believing that they were related to every form of life on the planet. We are related to every form of life on the planet, and that's backed up by a lot of evidence, such as genetics and transitional fossils. Now he gives us this clever little test, which says, which one is not like the others? A 3-year-old can tell, and he gives us 4 options: dog, wolf, coyote, and banana. Actually, banana is a plant, so we're not related to it. Then he says, he quotes Adolf Hitler first, which has nothing to do with evolution. Then he says, in the textbooks, it says that whales have pelvic and leg bones, and they're useless vestiges. And then he says, well, actually, these bones control the sexual reproduction, and he's right about that. And the textbook says useless vestiges. I don't know why. They're not useless, but vestigial organs, or vestigial structures is the proper term, says they've lost much or all of their original function through evolution. So, no, they're not useless, but they don't have their original function. Then he says that evolutionists say that we can use a fossil record in support, and he's right. And then he shows a diagram of horse evolution, and yes, that's a good diagram of horse evolution. Then he shows forks and knives and says, this is what evolutionists would claim is the evolution of cutlery. Well, actually, cutlery, it doesn't reproduce, it doesn't mutate, and natural selection doesn't apply to it. So no, cutlery can't evolve. And doesn't help that cutlery was probably found on the table, all of it. And when we find transitionals, we get deeper and deeper, and we find less and less complex. And the evolution of cutlery argument is simply a silly argument. Then he says the biggest problem with evolution is that it discredits the creator in favor of blind chance. There are two problems with this argument. Well, it doesn't discredit the creator. What if the creator used evolution? Is that such a problem? No, it's not. Evolution doesn't say anything about God. Evolution does not deal with the supernatural because it is science, and the supernatural is not falsifiable, and therefore is not science. And then he says in favor of blind chance. Now, as anyone who studied evolution would know, evolution doesn't favor blind chance at all. It uses natural selection. Quoting Richard Dawkins, evolution is the non-random survival of randomly varying factors. Now this is blind chance is an argument often used by creationists, but has no merit because no evolutionist says it's blind chance. Then he says that it's ludicrous that the eye could have been formed by blind chance. I agree. Natural selection is not blind chance. Then he says that if you're unintelligently designed, I don't believe this, but I'm going to refute this argument, then you're a slave to chemical reactions in your brain, which means you can't trust your thoughts. Now, this argument is really silly because natural selection would allow our thoughts to get more complex and more trustable. Because if our thoughts weren't trustable at all, if we were just really hallucinating, natural selection wouldn't apply. Because it wouldn't help us get food or anything. Now he addresses theistic evolution. He says some people believe that God used evolution, and then he says that's not the God of the Bible, because evolution says man came by death, and creation says death came by man. Well, there are a couple problems with this. The biggest one is that we read in context, the death in Genesis almost definitely refers to spiritual death. When Eve ate of the fruit, she did not drop dead in the garden. She was immediately separated from God. And so, yeah, it's spiritual death. And number two, it said the Bible says nothing about no man dying, or it says nothing about no death. It says stuff about no man dying. So no man had died when Adam and Eve was in the garden. So whether it was physical or spiritual death, the argument is poor. And also, God called his creation very good, not perfect. Okay, next he says, Genesis claims that man started smart, tall, and in direct contact with God. Well, the human race did start smart, tall, and direct contact with God. But, actually, I'm not sure about tall. I haven't found a verse to back that up. And, the human race evolved. And then God decided that it's done, or mankind is complete enough, and he added a soul. And that's what breathing the breath of life refers to in Genesis. Now, and he goes on to say some dumb things, and he says, oh yeah, and then he says, we're finding 50-foot skeletons, and actually, being 10, 16, 50 feet would kill somebody. People who are 9 feet tall die because their bodies aren't meant to handle that kind of weight. And you know what those skeletons prove? They prove something incredible. Someone can use Adobe Photoshop pretty well. Then he says that evolution claims there is no God. Actually, evolution doesn't deal with the supernatural and doesn't make any claims about the supernatural whatsoever. Then he says, Genesis says that we have absolute standards. Well, I think we have absolute moral standards. And evolution doesn't make any claims about morals. It's simply a biological theory. And biological theories have no effect on morals. Saying that evolution has an effect on morals is as ludicrous as saying that gravity has an effect on morals. So I'm done with part 1 of my video response. Next, you get to see part 2.